For those of you who aren't too full by lunch, you will recognise that I'm not Stephen. I'm going to be doing a little bit of this afternoon. I'm sure that you all agree that this morning was really powerful. So thank you to all of our speakers this morning. Really powerful sessions, and looking forward to more coming this afternoon. Without further ado, I will introduce Will from DSIT. Will is going to give us an overview of DSIT's consultation, a national conversation, which I know that lots of us have been talking about today. The timing is slightly off because we know that there's going to be an imminent announcement by the UK Prime Minister, but looking forward to hearing what Will is going to share with us about the consultation. So, Will, over to you.
Thanks, Charlotte, and thanks to Stephen as well and the team for inviting me to be here. It's really, really great to be here. And yeah, what a brilliant morning. I just took so much from that, and it was fascinating hearing from so many speakers who've been sort of directly impacted by what we're talking about, and not only policymakers like me and like many of us. So yes, my name is Will Jones. I am a Deputy Director in the Security and Online Harms Directorate in the UK's Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. So I'm part of the leadership team for the bit of the UK government that spends most of its time thinking about exactly the issues that we've talked about this morning. And what we've been doing as part of our work since the beginning of the year, really, is setting up, running, and yes, soon responding to a formal government consultation on child wellbeing called Growing Up in the Online World, which ran from beginning of March to the end of May this year. Why did we consult? I mean, we've got the same concerns as everyone else in this room and kind of every state around the country, really, and we can probably skip along to the next slide immediately, actually. These are fairly basic, but I will try and talk to them. We are concerned about getting the balance right. We are concerned about the impact of social media on children's wellbeing and development, but we are also aware that social media is far from just being a negative thing and a negative impact, as we heard so powerfully this morning, actually. And before we act, we want to make sure that we have got the balance right and that we understand the state of the evidence and that we understand the UK public's position on kind of issues relating to online safety. Specifically, the evidence point is worth reflecting on, actually. We absolutely recognise that there is not a sort of clear evidence base pointing one way or the other, but we're still keen to move quickly, so we've tried to find the right balance on that. I should say this is part of a wider work that the UK government's been doing on online safety, and there has been a lot. We've mentioned some what happened yesterday, actually, which I won't speak to today, but where the PM has been really clear with tech companies that they need to take more action to prevent children from creating, sharing or viewing nude images. There's also the Online Safety Act, which has been mentioned many times, which underpins all of our work. We've taken steps to tackle nudification apps, non-consensual image abuse, all of that. There's guidance on smartphones in schools. And the reason I slightly labour that point is I think there is a risk that the sort of output of a consultation is seen as the only thing the UK is doing, and it is not. It is absolutely part of our wider work. There isn't a sort of single fix. The consultation is about wellbeing. It's about enriching children's lives, both in terms of encouraging time away from the screen, actually, but also making sure that when children are online, they are in spaces which are safe, as we heard about earlier on. And it's about, as I say, gathering evidence from the public, but specifically gathering evidence from parents and from children. We launched a kind of technical version of a consultation, as each government does, but we also produced versions which were easier for parents and for children to complete and respond to. We didn't want it to be off-putting, we wanted it to be easy to respond to, and we absolutely wanted to hear that kind of lived experience of parents, of children, and children themselves. That's really, really important. So we can go on to the next slide. Just a bit about what it covered. Many of you will know this, many of you have been following it, but not everybody. It didn't shy away from the main question that everybody is talking about at the moment, post-Australia. So there is a specific question right at the top. about whether children should or shouldn't be able to use social media at 16, and indeed whether 16 would be the right age, and indeed whether it would be better to sort of move to restrictions on all social media, or to look at particular features, particular functions that should be restricted. And these will be familiar to many in the room, but stranger pairing, infinite scroll, algorithmic content generally. It looked at the digital age of consent and whether 13 is the right age. It looked at whether we've got the right balance for age assurance in terms of protecting children, but also putting obligations on adult users. It looked at the use of VPNs and other forms of circumvention, whether they should be age restricted or whether that's going kind of too far. And it looked at support for parents as well and asked about what extra support parents need. And it took a really broad definition of social media, so not just what we might classically define as social media, but messaging services, gaming, AI chatbots, which we've touched on earlier on. So kind of a whole range of the ways that in 2026, people who are 16 and under are using the internet and are being online. Okay, so next slide. The evidence thing's really important. So we're not just kind of looking at the data received through the consultation and saying, well, that's enough of an evidence base. So alongside the consultation, we have run a national conversation. We've had ministers out all over the place, I mean, including in Australia. One of our ministers was in Australia the week before last, but out in the UK as well, talking to children and parents and, again, making sure they're hearing directly those lived experiences. We've been piloting some of the possible interventions. So around the UK, until I think the week before last, there were teenagers who were experiencing a full ban. There were teenagers who were experiencing a curfew. There were teenagers who were experiencing sort of a daily budget of up to an hour or an hour and a half, I think, on social media. And there were teenagers who were experiencing none of those things, so that we could come back and say, well, how did it feel? What was the difference between quote unquote normal kind of 4 or 5 weeks and some time under those restrictions? We've been talking to many people in the room. We've been talking to industry. We've been talking to stakeholders in the sector. The Prime Minister spoke directly to tech firms a few weeks ago. And we've set up an expert panel to advise us. So 10 leading experts from UK universities on paediatrics, on computer science, psychology, recognising again, there isn't a sort of smoking gun we can point to and say this is the evidence, but getting advice on the evidence base and sort of what it shows us, what it tells us, and feeding that into the advice that goes to our ministers and Secretary of State. Some of those people also in the Australian analysis team, I believe. And so final slide. Where's this left us? It is a slightly odd time because we are between consultation and response at the moment, but we closed 2 weeks ago. We had just over 116,000 responses, if you include absolutely everything, full consultation, children, parents. Getting into 6 figures is astonishing. It's one of the biggest consultations the UK government has ever done. I think the consultation on civil partnerships did a bit better, but that's enormous. And it's a real sign of a kind of engagement that we've had from the public and the interest in doing something. We also had a response which I think has never happened before. We had a response from another government. Some of you may have seen this. It was published at the end of last week, I think, which I think is unique. I don't think that's ever happened that one government has responded to another's consultation. But there we go, fascinating. Shows some of the kind of wider interest on that. We haven't published many of the kind of statistical outputs yet. We will be doing so when we respond. The one we have published, because we had kind of ministerial team keen to use it in public, was that of the parental respondents. Close to, not quite, but close to 90% of parents responding said they thought that some kind of age-based restriction, in fact it was specifically a ban actually, was sort of an appropriate measure for government to take. Now this isn't a referendum, and we've mentioned referendums once today and I definitely shouldn't go there again. So it doesn't simply mean we kind of transfer that into policy, but it is a fascinating kind of snapshot of where the average parent in the United Kingdom is. That is it, because I have to leave on a bit of a cliffhanger, unfortunately. Ministers are going to make a final decision imminently, is exactly the right word, and announce something very nearly as imminently. The decision has not been made yet. our team are kind of working up the final advice at the moment. But ministers have been really clear, actually, in Parliament and elsewhere, that they don't intend to kind of have a do nothing or a, well, maybe we need to keep gathering evidence approach. There will be, whatever it is, there will be some kind of policy change. Exactly what it is, our ministerial team, our Prime Minister have yet to determine. But there'll be something. So, yeah, odd time to be giving this update, but we'd be very happy to come back to a future event once we know what that something is and talk about it a bit more. But until then, thank you very much.